I'm Rachel, and this is my second review video for the BookTube Prize 2019. The BookTube Prize was started by Robert at Barter Hordes, and it's being judged up and down the board by several booktubers across the interwebs. They're looking at 48 titles of literary fiction that was published in 2018 and whittling them down to the best book of the year. And in fact, we're not any longer in the big Octafinal lists of 48 anymore. We are now in the quarterfinal lists of 24 books, and whittling it down slowly throughout the year. But I decided, unofficially, to partake by highlighting 12 books that I have read or want to read off of the list, and then I would take them in spurts of 3 and review them, and then advance my own short list of my favorite of each video. And I decided to siphon off my videos based on the group lists of the Octafinals. So this video is about Group B of the Octafinals and the 3 books that were on that list. So I figured I'd go ahead and give quick reviews and thoughts of each of these 3 books. Starting with this one, this is The Mars Room by Rachel Kushner. This is the book that I actually read several months ago now. And this book takes place in a women's prison in California, and we're mostly following this woman Romy around. She was a stripper who is serving a life sentence for murdering a stalker. But we also go around to some of the other women in the prison and get into their backstories. They are mostly poorer women, women of color, women of alternative sexualities and gender identities. We also do go into a male prison to some people who are associated with the female prisoners. We get a perspective from a GED teacher. There's also a subplot having to do with journals from famous nature writers. It gets a little wonky, and I think this one is my least favorite of the 3. I liked what Kushner was saying about the hustle of life in this prison and what it takes to survive there. I think there was something poignant in what she was saying about how easy it is to dehumanize these prisoners, and when you look at their lives, you can see how we're kind of stuck in a vicious cycle of abuse, and that's why a lot of these women stay in the system. I think there's a lot of good stuff in here, but I think the execution was a bit all over the place. I don't think the journals really did any good at all. It was sort of light on plot until an infusion at the very end, so it was kind of a weird setup. So at the end of the day, I think I'm glad I read it, but I don't think it is the best on the list. The other 2 books I liked much better, so I had to go in deep to see which one I should advance. So I'm going to start with this book. This is A Place for Us by Fatima Farheen Mirza. It's particularly popular because it is the first published book in Sarah Jessica Parker's new imprint, and Mirza herself is a debut novelist. This is a family saga about a Muslim American family living in America in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. We go back and forth in time following this family, but there is a little bit of a structure. Part 1 takes place near present day at the eldest sister Hadia's wedding, which is mostly set up as an event where her estranged brother Amar will be rejoining the family for festivities, if everyone can get through it okay, given all of this back history. And then Part 2 goes back and forth, sweeping through time, following Amar and Hadia and their mother as main characters to see what it was like for these 2 children growing up and what it was like for Layla, the young mother, to come from India to a brand new culture, and what it was like to be a mother and a human and a Muslim woman in America. Part 3 returns to the wedding with a wash with all of that back history, and we see it through to its conclusion. And finally, Part 4 goes to the father, who we've only seen tangentially through everyone else's eyes. And he, from a future point, actually, is able to kind of streamline all of the back and forth of Part 2 and give his impressions of what was going on. This novel wasn't as structured as a lot of novels I read, and I think I actually found it a little difficult to remember a lot of details that I'm used to remembering in stories like this, and also the things that Mirza was focusing on, they were much smaller moments in the characters' lives. I mean, yes, at the end of the day, Amar develops pretty significant substance abuse problems, but a lot of novels might hyper-focus on that in a melodramatic way, but Mirza was much more interested in the smaller moments that brought Amar there, and then also brought his family to where they ended up. And it's about the mistakes that we make with each other, especially, I guess, with well, children to parents and parents to children, as we're trying to make our way through the world, and the children are trying to figure out who they are, and the parents are trying to guide them the best they can. And at the end of it, I was deeply moved by the characters and their experiences, and I think that Mirza touched upon things that were very nuanced and deep about what it means to be human and what it means to be part of a family, and I would absolutely recommend it. And the final book that I read in this group is The Great Believers by Rebecca Makkai. This book is a little bit more structured, even though it also goes back and forth in time, but we have specific timelines. The first timeline is in 1980 Chicago, and we are following Yale Tishman, who is a gay man trying to live life in his community during that time, but of course the community is racked by the AIDS crisis and the indifference of the world around them up to that crisis. This section takes place from about 1985 to 1992. The second section of the book is told through the perspective of Fiona. She's also a character in the first perspective. She's a young woman who lost her brother. Her brother's memorial sort of catapults part 1 into action. In part 2, she's a middle-aged woman in 2015. In the immediate plot, she's looking for her lost daughter in Paris, but it's really meant to be the prism of understanding what it's like for her to be living with the trauma of having nursed all her brother and all of her brother's friends who were dying of AIDS, you know, when she was young. So that's the general gist. There's also a whole lot going on beyond that. Like, Yale's professional life is very much fleshed out. He is working for a museum, a fledgling museum attached to a university, and through Fiona, in fact, through her great aunt, he becomes aware of this previously unknown art collection from Paris in the 1920s. The great aunt was a model and a lover of a fictionalized 1920s lost generation artist, and she's trying to give the scoop of this artistic backstory about who these men were, and it becomes quite apparent that it's a tragic parallel to the gay male community, because these men had been drafted into World War I, where, you know, if the fighting didn't kill them, often the flu did, or just, you know, shell shock later. So there's just this whole notion of these young men dying off and their gifts being lost to the world, and that's the parallel to what's happening to the gay male community. So Yale's life in particular felt really rich and textured and nuanced. I really appreciated that. I think I struggled a little more with Fiona. I mean, not as a character, but this prism of trying to understand the trauma of what she'd been through in the past 30 years, because we were seeing it through this very hyper-specific storyline of her trying to find her estranged daughter. And it becomes apparent that a major reason why they're estranged is because Fiona has been so traumatized by what happened that she wasn't really able to be a mother to her daughter Claire. And another thing, I guess, there were a few plot points that tied the two stories together. I mean, there were several plot points, and I appreciated a lot of them because Yale was one of the young men who Fiona was taking care of. But I think some of the plot points were a little too convenient for the sake of making even more drama than this story already had, which of course it has a lot of drama. It's a tragic event that all of these people are living through. But I still think this was an amazing book. It was just very rich and nuanced, and it told the history of the fallen. I think that's how I put it. I certainly have a sort of an emotional reaction to this book because the events of this book were taking place when I was a little girl, and in fact a pinnacle event of this book took place on my 3rd birthday, so I talk about making it personal when it isn't, but that's something. So I think it was very rich and nuanced and certainly deserving of its placement on the BookTube Awards because these two books have advanced, The Mars Room has not. But I think at the end of the day, I'm going to place A Place for Us by Mirza a little bit higher and advance this book to my personal shortlist. So that about covers it for me now. You can find links to my more comprehensive Goodreads reviews for all of these books linked down below. I'll also link to the BookTube prize and to my previous video about Group A of the Octafinals list. And I'm certainly hoping that the BookTube prize hashtag will link to other videos that judges and others have made about the BookTube prize. I'm certainly hoping that the conversation continues as we hurtle toward the finale, because we have all the way until October before we whittle this list down to number 1. So I'm excited to see where this goes. I believe in May the judges will convene again to whittle the list down to 12. So we'll see how A Place for Us and the Great Believers and all the other books do. I'm excited. But in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.